Welcome to Paper Crafters Library. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this Everything is Going to Be Fantastic card featuring Casual Friday's Truth Is stamp set. So I have here a 4 by 5 1/4 inch piece of Paper Tray Inks Stampers Select white cardstock. And I'm going to be stamping this flower image that comes from the Casual Friday stamp set Truth Is. Now I'm planning on coloring this with Copic markers, so I'm going to be stamping it with my Sukaneko Memento Tuxedo Black ink. This is my go-to ink whenever I color with Copics, and the Paper Tray Stamper Select White is also my go-to cardstock. So first thing I'm going to do is ink up my image by pressing my ink pad onto it. Now one of the things you may notice about this stamp is there's quite a lot of the acrylic around it. So it has a tendency to pick up ink. So whenever I'm working with a stamp like that, just in order to minimize smudges where I don't want them, I will often take a baby wipe and just clean some of that off. And it just reduces the likelihood that you're accidentally going to get those ink smears on your cardstock. Now I am going to stamp my image towards the right. So there you can see what that looks like. Now it looks like one portion of my line did not stamp very well. So what I'm going to do is after I'm done coloring it, I'm going to come back with a fine tip marker and I'm going to fix that, and I'll show you how to do that. So we'll do that though after we color the image with the Copic markers. So now because these flowers remind me a little bit of poppies, I thought that I'd color them in reddish pinkish tones. So I've chosen 3 colors of Copic markers: R22, R24, R29. Now one of the things that's important to know if you're just getting started working with Copics and you don't have tons of experience is that the reds tend to be one of the hardest colors to blend. You just have to work it that much more. Now the other thing is with Copics is that there's a number of different ways that you can color with them. Probably the most common is to go from the lightest to the darkest. I have tried that way as well as the other way, which is the one that I use, and that's starting with the darkest and going to the lightest. I find that that way I have more control over my blending and I use less ink overall. So it's just my personal preference, and that's the way I'm going to be doing it. But there's no right or wrong way. If you see other people doing it the other way and you're more comfortable doing it the other way, well, that's perfectly fine. Now, we have a whole series in the library on Copic coloring, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, but I'm just going to share with you a couple of things. So when I'm working with my markers with a particular color, so this would be like a blending family, I always uncap the markers that I'm working with at that time. And then I like to arrange them from in the order that I'm going to use them. So the dark to the medium to the light. And as I'm using them, what I try to train myself to do is to keep putting them like this so that it just makes it faster. I know which marker I'm grabbing. Now, I'm going to be using a stroke kind of like a feather stroke. So when I'm starting, if you imagine that this is the edge of my image, depending on how big the image is. Now this flower, you see the petals are not that big, so I'm going to be using much smaller strokes. The bigger the image, the broader the stroke you can use. So for something like this, I'm going to hold my pen probably at about a 45-degree angle like this. You want to touch and drag, so imagine that you're just flicking, I guess could be another term. Touch and drag, touch and drag. And you can see these are probably medium-sized strokes. Working in this petal, I'm even going to be doing it even smaller, so I'm probably going to have my pen at an even higher angle. Now, when I'm laying down my first layer, I'll do my darks first, then I'll come in with my mid-tone, and I'll do that same flicking motion, and I just overlap it a teeny weeny bit. And then when I come in with my lightest tone, I will just overlap that just a teeny weeny bit. And you can see right away that it looks very patchy and not blended. So at this point we have to go back and repeat that process. And that's, you know, as you go through it a couple times, that's what helps blend it all together and get that beautiful seamless gradient look. So that's the process that I'm going to be following. Now in this case, I'm going to be coloring them. I'm going to imagine that the sun is shining straight down on these flowers. So the darkest area is going to be towards the bottom of each of the petals, and the lightest is going to be towards the top of the petals. So if you imagine the sun's just shining downwards, or maybe in this case, because the flowers turn that way, the sun is coming in this direction. And if it helps, you can always leave your pencil like that as a reminder to where your light area is going to be and where your shadows are going to be. So here we go. Let's start. So I'm going to start with this flower here. You can see I've got, again, my light strokes. Now how far you pull it up depends on how much you want that red color and how much you want of the pink. So there you can see what my first layer looks like. And now I'm going to come back with my red. And I may actually pull it just a little bit higher. And now I've got my mid-tone. And then my lighter color, and you'll notice, of course, that as you go over it, the tones deepen. So now that part's dark enough, so I don't need any more. I'm not going to put any more of the red right now. I'm just of the darkest red, the R29. I'm going to take the R24 and just work on blending that edge out a little bit more, and then come in with the R22. And I'm flicking along that edge, just trying to soften and blend it. So when I get to this point now, you see I've gone over it a few times. I'm just going to let that dry before I work on it anymore. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the other petals. Now, I usually angle this as I'm coloring. So because I like to flick going from left to right, I will angle my cardstock this way as I'm working. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to speed up the clip so you can watch what I'm doing in real time, but the process is pretty much going to be the same as you watched me here. see, I finished coloring my flowers. Now, technically, so I said to you the sun was coming this way. Technically, this flower would create a shadow against this flower, so you wouldn't see quite the highlights there, but whenever I'm coloring, I don't want to get too carried away, I guess you could say. I mean, there's no sense in getting too technical. As long as it looks nice and shaded, that's all I'm worried about. So now what I want to do is correct that line that was missing. Now, generally what I will do is I will take a fairly fine tip pen so that I can do a series of short strokes. I don't want to do too thick. I might come back with a thicker pen afterwards, but usually I'll start with something finer and do a series of short strokes, which is a lot easier to do if you don't have like a super steady hand. This might actually be a little bit too fine. So you can see here, essentially what I'm doing is kind of building up the color slowly. And there already, you don't really see it. I'm just going to go grab a pen that's a little bit thicker. So here I was using my Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen, the extra small. Now here I have the fine, and it's a bit of a thicker tip, and I'm just going to come in because the line itself is fairly thick, so I'm going to try to thicken that up just a little bit. And there you can see how that looks, so it's pretty much fixed. And any of the lines, if you want, if you find they didn't stamp as dark as you would like them to, you can always come back with your pen and just touch them up a little bit. But I wouldn't fiddle with it too much, because that's where you accidentally, you know, go out of the lines or something and end up wrecking your image. At least that's happened to me before. So here's what the flower looks like now. So we're going to move on. So now I'm going to use this sentiment that says everything is going to be fantastic. It comes from the same stamp set, but this time I'm going to stamp in my Jet Black Archival by Ranger. I find that in general it just seems to be a darker ink, and I tend to stamp most things in that, other than if I'm coloring with Copics. I'm going to position my sentiment just around here and stamp. So there you can see how that looks. And now, generally, even though the inks are pretty quick drying, I still always like to take my heat tool just to make sure it's completely dry. So I'm just going to do that quickly, and then we'll move on. Now, since there's quite a lot of white space around my image, I think what I'm going to do is trim it a little bit with my paper trimmer. So what I want to do is I'm going to start by taking a 1/2 inch off of one side, the side where I have the most white space, and then a 1/2 inch off of the top. That's perfect. There you see what that looks like. So the dimensions, I'm just using the lines on my grid paper here, are now 3.5 by 4 3/4 inch. My next step now is to center and stick this piece onto a piece of cardinal cardstock. Now you could have picked any color of cardstock within the range of color we used here, but because I wanted to draw the attention to the darker of the reds, I decided to use a red rather than going with more of a pink tone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to center and stick this onto my cardstock. Now this cardstock, it's called Cardinal cardstock, and it is 3 5/8 by 4 7/8 inch. So just big enough to leave a very fine border around my image piece. So I'm just applying some double-sided adhesive, and then I'm going to center and stick this. Now to stick this onto my card, I want to pop it up, and since it's a fairly big panel, I'm going to use my Scotch 3D foam. So, and the reason I'm choosing this, I mean really you can use any kind of a 3D foam, but the reason I'm choosing this one is simply because it's very easy to apply big pieces to. Oh, sorry, I was having a hard time finding my scissors there. So as you can see, rather than having to fidget with individual little pieces of dimensional foam, I can very quickly and easily apply strips of this. And it's very easy to peel off the backing as well. So now I'm just going to center and stick this onto my card front. Now my card I created out of a standard sheet of cardstock. So I cut an 8.5 by 11 inch sheet at 4 1/4 by 11 inches, and then I scored it at 5.5 inches and folded it in half. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and center this, and then I will be back. Okay, so I stuck that down. Now the final little touch, I mean, you could certainly leave the card like that. The final little touch, though, that I'd like to add are just a little scattering of rhinestones. It just adds tiny little bit of bling. That one I think is too big. I always tend to overthink rhinestone arrangement too much. Now see, that's too much. Okay, well, at some point you just have to make a decision, right? So, whoops. Where'd that go? See, I lost my rhinestone. Well, let's grab one more. Okay, there we go. So there you can see what our card looks like, and it's now finished. If you enjoyed this video, you enjoy the way we teach, and would like to learn even more, we invite you to check out the Paper Crafters Library. Whether you're a beginner looking to learn the basics or an advanced paper crafter looking to learn new skills and techniques, you'll find it all here. Stamping, card making, scrapbooking, altered art, mixed media, we cover it all. With almost 2,000 videos currently in our library and videos added each month, we are the largest and most comprehensive online library of video tutorials for paper crafters on the internet. We invite you to visit our library and see what we're all about.